the transition plan then should start scheduling that barrier removal. And that's going to be an agency decision. You know, what can you commit to annual accessibility improvements? Is it going to be $20,000? Is it going to be $200,000? Is it going to be $2 million? That's an individual entity question to answer, and it's going to be different for every single entity. But looking at that you have an ongoing budget dedicated to the ADA transition plan, that you're scheduling barrier removal, you know, where they are, that barrier removal fits into the master plan for the park or recreation facility, and that you're also looking at other factors like proximity to duplicative programs or services. So let's say, for example, you have 4 swimming pools scattered throughout the city. Maybe you're focusing on your most frequently highest volume used facility first for your accessibility improvements, and then you're looking at your second location might be one that is the furthest away, to make sure that geographically you're making those programs and services readily available, more dispersed or distributed throughout the community. And also recognizing that scheduling barrier removal, that's an ongoing process. It is, you're always doing it. And so something that might have been like 100 on your list and not coming up for barrier removal until 2023, all of a sudden you might have received a complaint or a bad Yelp review on it, and all of a sudden, you know, and it's attracted the ire of one of your elected officials. All of a sudden that's like number 1 on your list of priorities there. So recognizing that scheduling the barrier removal is a dynamic, ongoing process, but that you at least know what needs to be done in the event that one of your priorities or several of your priorities change for other external or political factors. Ongoing transition planning, you know, we seriously believe that it's a dynamic working document, that you continue to make it available for public inspection, and that you engage people with disabilities throughout that process. I do have a couple of questions here from the chat room, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what you guys could do right now as we come up at the end of our time. There's a question here, and I know there's a couple of longer ones, but I do, let's see here. I have Tilden. Carla, I see your question here. I'd love to talk to you. Send me that same question in an email if you could, and then we can talk more specifically. There's a question here about bathrooms. They're building a new bathhouse at a site to one of their camps for kids with disabilities. What should the clearance be between the building and a fence? Well, that's a good question. There's a pool located in front of the building with a fence around it. So, and I've heard 3 foot and 5 foot. So the clearance between the building and the fence. Well, you need to make sure that there's an accessible route between those locations that connects each of the site amenities. It should be at least, the accessible route should be at least 36 inches wide. If I'm not quite capturing the essence of your question, please feel free to send me an email. The location of the fence itself, that's not part of the ADA standards. So you would be looking at the location of the fence as actually part of your state or local building code, or maybe even your health code if it is required there. But the accessible route itself should be at least 36 inches wide with turning space at least 60 inches in diameter, at least every 200 feet. So now, you know, if we're looking at new construction, we would always be recommended recommending to you to use that wider path that is at least 60 inches wide, because it provides for access for a greater number of people rather than the 36 inches. If you want to talk more specifically on that, I'm happy to do that if you want to send me an email. But it's a good question, and it brings up a point that it's important. You know, you don't need to know every single facet of the accessibility standards, but you need to know enough to ask. You know, like, I know there's a requirement for the accessible route. I'm not quite sure how it applies. That in and of itself should trigger you to say, okay, I need to ask. I can either call the access board, I can call my regional ADA center, or, you know, I can call a couple other building code officials out there. You know, I kind of recommend that you ask a couple. If this is a new building, I always recommend that you have availability of bringing in somebody that can specifically review the plans for compliance with the accessibility standards. So you might have somebody on staff that develops that expertise to do that, or you might look at bringing in somebody that reviews those plans on an as-needed basis. It's totally dependent on what the resources you have internally are, and then what you might be able to do with professional services to support your entity.